Welcome to ADHD Realities, where we dive into the beautiful, the chaotic, and often hilarious world of ADHD. If you're new here, I'm Leanne Borneman, certified sex therapist and sexologist, and I have ADHD, which means, yes, my brain sometimes craves stimulation like a raccoon craves shiny objects. No shame whatsoever. And guess what? That craving for stimulation plays a huge role in how some ADHDers experience BDSM and sensation seeking. So, today we're talking about ADHD, BDSM, and why sensation seeking isn't just about jumping out of planes. It can also be about the ropes, the impact play, and the sheer thrill of pushing boundaries. So, buckle up and let's get started. Oh, I'm such a nerd. All right. So let's get real. Okay. First and foremost, ADHD brains are wired for the most part for novelty. And that's not just some quirky personality trait, it is pretty much hardwired into our biology. And this is where I'm going to remind everyone once again, as always, that ADHD is experienced on a spectrum. So, how one person presents will not be the same as other. So, please understand, do not compare yourselves and your experiences. But when we are talking about our brains, they do operate with lower baseline dopamine levels, receptors, which means we're constantly seeking ways to give that feel good neurotransmitter a little boost. And so when we're looking at dopamine, it becomes responsible for the pleasure, the motivation, the reward, right? So when we don't have enough of it, we can actually end up seeking stimulation anywhere we can get it. And sometimes that doesn't mean stimulation that we are actually wanting. It's more about what the brain needs in the moment, right? And so, whether that's through like doing extreme sports, chasing adrenaline, jumping out of a plane, deep diving into a new hobby for an interest, or maybe just thinking about doing something and going through all the steps inside your head of what to do, how to do it, right? Because that is definitely a dopamine release. When it comes to us ADHDers, we need stimulation. And that stimulation extends into our playtime, into our sex lives, which is where the engagement and experience of BDSM can come into play. And so now, if you're at this point listening to this and you're like, wait a minute, does that mean I like BDSM because I have ADHD? I'm going to just burst the little bubble here and say, absolutely not, right? ADHD does not mean you like BDSM. Okay. But what we're talking about today is why we see, at least in my clinical observations and hearing from other professionals in the field, we see a lot of ADHDers, yes, engaging in BDSM. And this episode is going to be unpacking the why behind it. And at this point in time, there's no empirical literature that is designated towards the intersection between ADHD and BDSM. And that's where my current research is trying to fill that gap. Work that I've been doing for my dissertation. We do have research on BDSM and autism, but again, when it comes to that intersection between ADHD and BDSM, there is absolutely no research currently published on the topic. And that really sucks, right? Because I can see it through my clinical observations, the work I do with my clients, and I hear it from other people on social media. So, where is the science, people, that really help support us, right? So for many ADHDers, they can find BDSM helping them stay present in a way that just traditional playtime may not be allowing. And it's not just about the physical intensity. It's about creating an environment that keeps the brain engaged by providing exactly the kind of sensory input you may be craving. Okay. This goes back to my never ending mantra. It's all about setting your environment, your relationships, and your playtime up for success, right? So it's like when we're engaging in BDSM, it's like tricking your brains into focusing by giving the brain the structure. the intense experience that is allowing it to tap into the need for novelty and stimulation. So, what I want to do is I want to break it down in a way that's going to make sense and that you can relate to. Okay. So, the real life ADHD experience of trying to stay engaged during sex, right? Raise your hand if you've ever been in the middle of sex and suddenly you're thinking about what you're maybe going to eat later. What are the things you have to go get from the store? Did you pack your children's lunches? The weird squeaky noise the bed makes, right? All of these things can be problematic for us to stay engaged. Oh, and don't forget that one time you thought you heard a siren outside, had an internal debate whether it was an emergency vehicle or just a car alarm. And yes, I totally self disclosed. That is a real lived experience for me. And in that moment, my mind and many other ADHDers' minds wander. And so it's just what can happen. And so while playtime is supposed to be deeply immersive in terms of the experience we're having, for many ADHDers, it can be really tough to keep that attention locked in. And so when we're looking at traditional playtime, it can feel more vague. It can feel too unstructured and maybe even too routines, right? And so it doesn't always then give our brains the stimulation to stay fully involved. And that's where BDSM can come in for a lot of people. And so when we add controlled intensity, like something of impact play, so think spanking, the flogging, sensory deprivation, like adding blindfolds, you're taking a sensory experience away, your eyesight, right? Or earplugs, taking the sound away. All of those types of things can suddenly unlock a focus that allows you to stay very present in the moment. And the physical sensations are heightened. And the structure of the activity helps ground us in the here and the now. And so there's no room then for our mind to wander because the sensations, the roles, the boundaries, everything that you are doing in that moment is requiring full focus. And so it becomes almost like flipping a switch, right? The brain that normally bounces between a million different things is now locked in. It's hyper focused on the experience. And quite honestly, for a lot of my clients, that is very incredibly satisfying because it's like freedom, empowerment. And it doesn't just become about, though, physical sensations. The structure and the clear communication in BDSM dynamics can be incredibly grounding for ADHDers as well. We're not just going with the flow, which sometimes can be very overwhelming, not understanding and knowing what the hell is going on. It kind of becomes like a messy room. And with BDSM, everything becomes intentional. And many of us with ADHD struggle with impulsivity or difficulty reading social cues. And so the idea of like, what if, how are they feeling? How are they thinking? Right? That's a lot. That's a lot to try and figure out, to interpret. Right. And it can be exhausting. It can be exhausting to try and play mind reader. Right. And so this need for communication within BDSM is very helpful because it leads to minimizing miscommunication and loss of focus. And when we look at BDSM, the communication is explicit. And on top of that, it's laid out in advance, right? You're in negotiation. You're dealing with consent. You're dealing with understanding the boundaries that become clear cut for both of you or more than two of you to engage in. You're making interactions so much easier to navigate because you remove the mind reader thing that so many of my couples that I work with struggle with. Because it's this misconception that you should just know what your partner wants or needs or thinks. And that there is, in some ways, this like expectation of how you should be showing up to the show. And that for an ADHDer can be very overwhelming and underwhelming as well. Right. So the beauty of BDSM lies within the structure that it provides. So there's a script to follow, there's roles to play, steps to take. And all of that brings a sense of clarity to an ADHD brain. And an ADHD brain that can often feel overwhelmed by chaos of life. And so the rules are established beforehand through scene negotiations and creations, and everyone involved knows what's then expected. There's no one guessing anything here. It's quite responsible when you think about it. You're not left wondering, is this okay? Is this touch okay? Should I be doing this? Are they into it? Am I going to give them an orgasm? Like, none of that needs to happen because you talk about everything beforehand. That clear framework gives ADHDers a sense of safety and stability, which can be incredibly grounding when we're usually navigating a world in a state of either constant distraction or overwhelm, overstimulation. And so BDSM can be a form of structured novelty, because ADHDers, we thrive on new experiences within predictable frameworks. That's the key here. We're wired in some capacity to seek novelty, yes, but we also need some sense of structure to keep us anchored. And BDSM actually can provide that perfect balance, right? The setup, the roles, the rules, the sensory experience, they're all designed to create an engaging experience that also then feels safe and predictable. It's like having the best of both worlds. We get to explore something new and intense, but we don't have to worry about losing control or getting overwhelmed. And on top of that, the rituals that become involved in BDSM, whether it's preparing for a scene, setting the boundaries, engaging in aftercare, which is also really important, all of this offers a layer of emotional and physical regulation that a lot of us ADHDers often need. And so, first and foremost, the aftercare piece becomes huge for a lot of people who say that they engage in BDSM, but then they feel very irritable afterwards. Well, you're not regulating yourself after all of that intense interaction. And so this is where aftercare comes into play and is really vital for a lot of ADHDers. It's a vital piece regardless when you're interacting in BDSM, but aftercare for ADHDers can be very, very, very helpful, right? And these rituals not only keep that experience grounded, but they also create that sense of connection, that sense of emotional safety, which again is also very crucial for navigating intense experiences. And so when we look at aftercare in particular, it can be incredibly nurturing, like I said before, for ADHDers because it allows a person to process the emotional after effects of whatever scene you just did, right? And reestablish the connection in a grounded way. This kind of emotional regulation after heightened sensory experiences can provide such a sense of calm, a sense of satisfaction that is really often hard to find in chaos of daily life. And so when we're looking at BDSM, it is very important to have that space. So, does then BDSM help ADHDers stay engaged? I would say absolutely, 100%. And this is where not having the empirical research is not helpful because clinical observations that I have in my clinical practice says yes, 100%. And when we do look at the research, when we're looking at ADHD and sexual behaviors and functioning and outcomes, we see higher rates of dissatisfaction, attention issues, lack of orgasms with partnered sex and playtime. And it always comes back to attention, being distracted. And so this is why, for me, it's mind-boggling that we have not leaned into better understanding the effects positively that BDSM can have for ADHDers. So yeah, it can definitely keep somebody engaged, and it provides a unique framework for stimulation that taps into our need for novelty, for our need for structure, the sensory inputs, the stimulation, right? It gives us an outlet to focus, to express those, feelings and experience everything in ways that traditional playtime might not be able to provide. It can be boring, it can be understimulating. So, even beyond that, BDSM offers a safe space, a space to safely engage with desires, to find the grounding, to connect in ways that feels intentional, fulfilling, something everyone deserves. And that intentional piece is really big. So, when it comes to engagement and focus, I want to shift now to hyperfocus, right? So, if you have ADHD, you know the feeling. It's the state where time seems to stretch and shrink at the same time. You're either so engrossed in something that the world outside disappears, and suddenly hours have passed and you didn't even realize you skipped a meal or five. That's also a lived experience on my end. It's almost like a strength, right? Because hyperfocus can make us incredibly productive, which will allow us to achieve so much more in a few hours than maybe some person can get in a whole day. But then there's that flip side to it, where it can also lead to the predicament of pulling an all-nighter because we just wanted to watch one more episode. Or maybe you needed to finish that one last task, and that random task, like organizing your damn sock drawer for absolutely no reason at all, takes you a long time. Again, I am totally all here for the self disclosure. That is me to a T. And if you relate, high five for you. So, what does all that then have to do with BDSM? Well, BDSM can tap into the same strengths of hyperfocus. That structured nature of BDSM provides a framework where ADHDers can fully become absorbed in the moment. It's not just about physical intensity, it's about mental engagement. And for many ADHDers, our brains crave structure and challenge, things to latch onto to keep us grounded and involved. So, like playing a scene, setting up the space, engaging in defined roles and expectations can help bring us into that hyper focused zone where we can become completely absorbed in it. It becomes like that mental workout that uses our brain's love for planning, the ability to strategize, and that novelty as a way for us to stay locked in. It's like the anchor, right? And so imagine this. If you're having traditional sex, it can sometimes feel vague, right? Or unfocused for a lot of people, just in general. But then when we have the layer of ADHD, I've heard a ton of reports that it's just, I struggle. So maybe it's spontaneous. Maybe there's no clear direction. And the next thing you know, your mind is off in a million places thinking about the grocery list or your to-do list or work engagements or the email you forgot to answer. But BDSM changes that for a lot of people because it offers a structured blueprint for the experiences you're having by creating those clear expectations, creating the defined roles, the sensory experiences that demand our attention. It's like going from let's see just what happens to here's the plan, I'm all in, let's engage. That structure means we don't have to navigate the vast unknown. We're given something to anchor ourselves to, which allows our brains to stop wandering and we're totally focused. And so for many ADHDers, we can then thrive when there's a challenge or a goal to focus on, right? So outside of BDSM, I can't tell you how many ADHDers I've met and worked with that go to school and then school ends and then they're working in their field and they're bored, they're stagnant because there's no goal, there's no next move, there's no what can I be doing? How can I grow? Like the strategizing and like finding like the avenue for growth is like huge for a lot of ADHDers. And so BDSM offers that challenge through its rituals, through the setup that it creates. So whether it's negotiating the boundaries, selecting the right tools, following specific steps in a scene, this structure engages our minds in a way that spontaneous sex just sometimes can't do. Right? So think of it like a well organized workout routine. Every action has a purpose. And each step within that keeps us engaged in that process. This is why like Pilates work wonderful for me because while like the beginning is always the same, every single time it's something new. I'm still doing Pilates, but I'm there. I'm getting that novelty, but I'm still doing something different every single time. And it's very similar to how BDSM could be created for a lot of individuals, right? Or BDSM could be like your favorite food that you have for 2 months straight. I mean, I know I've gone through that, right? Where you can eat the same thing for like a month and then you want to throw it away and try something new because you become hyper focused on that specific thing. Well, BDSM could look exactly the same way. And so for our ADHD brains, that predictability paired with the excitement of the novelty, it can create the ideal environment for that full engagement that leads to that focus. And that's the beauty of BDSM. It incorporates the novelty within a structured framework. And this is where an ADHDer can truly shine if it works for them, if it is the right fit. It's not just about being turned on by new experiences. It's about getting to enjoy that newness while having the reliable roadmap that keeps us on track. And that ritualistic nature that comes from BDSM, from preparing the space to engaging in the negotiation to following the step by step process, all of it creates a sense of anticipation and the engagement then that fuels that hyper focus. Our brains love knowing what's next, but still feeling the excitement of what's to come is the key. And it's the best of both worlds, the structured novelty that keeps you from getting distracted while offering the kind of intense experience you may be craving. And so when you add in the sensory aspects of BDSM, impact play, bondage, sensory deprivation, temperature play, so much other variables, it's like the ultimate engagement for an ADHD brain. The sensory feedback is constant and it will keep you in the moment while, all to say, the roles, the expectations ensure we don't slip into distractions. It's the structure, remember the anchor. And every sensation, every touch, every command serves as a specific purpose in building towards the end goal that you have created with your partner or partners. And in this way, then, BDSM can almost feel like a game, which is very titillating, where all the pieces are designed to keep our brains engaged, focused, constantly coming back for more. There's this one game that I think of, and when I say game, I think of Dungeons and Dragons. I've always wanted to play it because the idea of it just excites the crap out of me. And I am sure there's a lot of individuals who are neurodivergent that also love Dungeons and Dragons for the same type of structure and outline BDSM kind of follows as well, right? And so going back to BDSM, let's not forget the payoff, right? The release of tension, physical exertion that can come from it, emotional release, even within the aftercare process. This all ties into the satisfaction we get from hyperfocus. So ADHDers don't just need something to hold our attention. We need something that feels rewarding, feels fulfilling when it's over. And BDSM can be clear structure, right? And so that allows the combined of intense sensory experiences and emotional connection it can foster, creating that space where we can feel accomplished, present, and even really freaking satisfied. It's not just about the act of it, it becomes the entire process, the journey, the emotional closure that can feel so freaking amazing for so many people. And so BDSM, in an essence, creates the perfect storm for ADHD brains. Structured novelty, intense focus, clear expectations. I'm going to say that one again, clear expectations, sensory stimulation. It's an environment that is set up for success because it keeps individuals with ADHD mentally and physically engaged while also providing the kind of clarity and the fulfillment that can be hard to find in many traditional or less structured experiences when we're talking about our playtime. And so, for those of us who live with ADHD, this kind of structured engagement is often exactly what could be needed to feel fully alive, to feel that groundedness, and then to feel the connectiveness. There's so many variables here. And ADHDers don't just like also new things. We also sometimes need them. And so our brains are literally wired to seek novelty, intensity, physical sensation. And that craving for new experiences is deeply embedded in the neurological structure of ADHD, which can make it much more than just a preference. It can be a biological motive. And so this drive can manifest in a variety of ways, from an obsession with roller coasters, right? Maybe certain music, to then, yeah, a good spanking, a good flogging. It's all about the need for something to cut through the noise of the mind that is constantly seeking stimulation and engagement. And so, to really understand why we're so drawn to these kind of experiences, I want to dive into what's happening neurologically. So, when we're focusing on sensation seeking, it becomes closely tied to our brain's reward system. So, particularly the dopamine pathways, the receptors. And dopamine is often referred to that feel good neurotransmitter hormone, right? And it plays a key role in motivation, in the pleasure that we're having. And all of that then reinforces the behaviors. And so, for a lot of us with ADHD, the dopamine system doesn't function in the same way as it does in those without ADHD. And so, instead of like having that balanced release of dopamine, our ADHD brains often have a deficiency or irregularity in those dopamine signalings, in those receptors, which leads to like a heightened state of understimulation. And that understimulation can create a constant craving for new experiences and sensations in order to light up the brain, feel more engaged, feel more satisfied. In other words, we seek novelty not because we're bored, but because our brains are biologically almost designed to crave it. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so if I'm speaking out of turn, please, by all means, reach out. Let me know if you have more information here. I'm not the neuroscientist in the room. But going back then to BDSM, that's where BDSM can come in as a tool to fulfill the need for those intense sensory inputs, whether it's through impact play, such as the spanking, the flogging, the restraints, the temperature play using the ice or the hot wax, role dynamics, using the Dom versus sub, right? BDSM offers so many different structured and controlled environments where intensity can feel and be safely experienced. And so that heightened sensation in BDSM can help override the typical distractions a lot of us ADHDers can face, right? Focusing attention on the present moment, the here, the now experience amplified by the physical and intimacy piece of BDSM. It helps break that cycle of the constant mind chatter that a lot of ADHDers experience. And it allows then individuals to really become fully engaged within themselves, fully within the sensations and the emotions that they're experiencing. But the attraction to BDSM isn't just about experiencing intense sensations or exploring dominance. And I don't use the word pain because I don't necessarily think a lot of people are aiming to reenact breaking their leg, right? Pain is generally something that's unwanted. Intense sensation is something wanted. No one wants to just break their leg, right? So that's why I use intense sensation instead of the word pain. But you do, and you use the words that fit well, okay? But going back to that, it's about depth of the experience. And so a lot of ADHDers find themselves craving the deep pressure stimulation, which is why so many of us may love a weighted blanket, a tight hug, the comfort of squeezing ourselves into small spaces. It's not just about the pressure itself. It's about how that pressure affects our nervous system, right? So deep pressure is a form of input that has calming and grounding effects on the body. And BDSM activities like rope bondage, body compression, or even kneeling in specific postures can all offer just that. And these techniques intentionally engage the nervous system, providing a sensation that feels both stimulating but also regulating. And so, for a lot of us ADHDers, it can become a way to find both focus and calm in an environment that encourages also then mindfulness and presence, giving us a moment to ground ourselves amidst all the chaos of daily life. It becomes the escape. It becomes basically like the deep tissue massage or the massage that many people like to go to relax and feel focused and in the moment, right? And BDSM can also then act as a form of sensory therapy. Just like, a lot of us neurodivergent folk rely on maybe fidget toys, weighted vests, stimming behaviors to regulate the sensory input and the emotions we're having. Well, guess what? BDSM provides an outlet for that same need for sensory engagement. However, what sets BDSM apart is that it allows for more socially and sexually expressive versions of self-regulation. It becomes an opportunity to engage in these types of forms of sensory feedback while also tapping into emotions like desire, connection, control. BDSM, therefore, isn't just about physical sensations. It's about using the body, the mind, all together in ways that are both affirming and fulfilling. So basically, it's very empowering. And of course, we can't ignore the biochemical rush that can come with certain kinds of BDSM play, right? Activities like impact play or intense power dynamics, they can actually release a cocktail of adrenaline, endorphins, and those chemical cocktails create euphoric feelings that can leave an ADHDer feeling clear-headed, focused, emotionally reset in ways that are hard to replicate in our everyday life. And it's interesting too, because that rush of endorphins can provide a sense of calm and happiness that allows the mind to settle, while the adrenaline heightens the focus, the alertness, which creates a temporary disconnect from that restlessness that often accompanies many individuals with ADHD. So, in sum, BDSM is much more than just a way to engage in power dynamics or indulge in physical sensations. For ADHDers, it can become a tool that taps into the very neurological mechanisms that govern our need for stimulation, the need for focus, emotional regulation, whether it's through deep pressure, intense sensations, rush of chemicals released during play. BDSM can offer a way for ADHD brains to achieve regulation and groundedness, often so much as so in ways that are deeply satisfying and fulfilling. It's a structured form of self-expression that will and does allow a lot of individuals to engage with their bodies, their minds, their emotions in ways that feel both great and also affirming, while all simultaneously providing the sensory input that our brains crave. And so, what then about regulation? Because let me tell you something, BDSM, yeah, it can be a form of regulation. BDSM isn't just about sensation. It can also be another effective tool for emotional and sensory regulation, especially for us individuals with ADHD. Because when we look at it, ADHD is often associated with emotional dysregulation, heightened response to emotions. And that can all lead to feeling very overwhelmed and not in control, right? It's kind of like the tornado. And so for many ADHDers, the structured, consensual nature of BDSM provides a predictable, a safe environment where intense emotions can be explored in controlled ways, which then allows for that grounding and that regulation that's often really hard to find elsewhere. And so at its core, BDSM offers a set of practices that can mirror the sensory regulation techniques commonly used by neurodivergent individuals. Deep pressure, rhythmic movement, controlled intensity, all are key components of many BDSM activities. And they also then serve as grounding techniques that help to calm the body and the mind. How many times have you been told by a therapist, if you've gone to therapy, if you're feeling overwhelmed, clench your muscles and your fists really hard for 5 seconds and release? Guess what, honey? That's deep pressure. That's also rhythmic movement, controlled intensity. Okay. So, for instance, going back to BDSM, that repetitive nature of impact play, such as the spanking, the flogging, that can provide a sense of predictability and order, helping to release pent-up energy, while also at the same time allowing a state of focus. And the pressure from using restraints or the sensation of being physically held all can create then a sense of security. Think of that weighted blanket or a deep tissue massage, both of which are definitely common tools to self-regulate. And you're using external things to help regulate because, again, we have deficits associated with executive functioning, specifically when we're talking about the emotional regulation piece. And so trying to use things in our environment to make up for whatever deficit we're experiencing is going to be the pathway to real more success than if you're trying to rely on a part of your brain that may not be fully available for you. And so the emotional regulation that comes with BDSM goes beyond just the physical experience. One of the most vital components of BDSM is the communication piece, right? The consent, the negotiation, the aftercare. These principles provide the structure that can be especially beneficial for a lot of us ADHDers who may struggle with impulse control or maybe processing your emotions in the heat of the moment. Guess what? You don't have to worry about that with BDSM. Before any activity begins, consent is negotiated. It allows all the parties involved to establish their clear boundaries, their expectations. It creates a sense of safety, a sense of control, which by default can reduce any anxiety you may have been experiencing outside of this type of dynamic. And it makes everyone feel respected. The scene negotiations, right? Making your scene. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What tools? What lighting? All of that, right? And so aftercare, again, I stress it, very essential part of BDSM process, especially if you have ADHD, because it offers an opportunity to process your emotions post-scene. And one of our deficits associated with our executive functioning is self-awareness, self-regulation. And so in the moment, we struggle more to be self-aware, but we're really good after the fact, right? Like, how many times have you had a conversation with somebody and you think afterwards, oh, shit, I should have said this, or I really maybe overpowered that conversation. I hope they don't think I'm an asshole, right? We do better after the fact. So aftercare process helps manage the emotional come down. It allows you to tap into self-awareness, giving you a space to discuss. And the come down often follows those intense experiences. And that reflection piece is really important because it also then provides emotional support in structured environments. And that feels amazing when you feel seen, heard, validated, and supported. And so that emotional support helps mitigate the emotional whiplash that can sometimes occur after intense experiences, which then provides that space to reset recover in a way that works for you, that feels nurturing rather than overwhelming. And so, additionally, BDSM can actually offer ADHDers a unique space to explore power dynamics, such as when we're talking about Dom versus sub. And it does this by in a way that allows for emotional safety and self-exploration, which is huge, right? Because the clear roles and expectations help create a sense of control, which can be very grounding for a lot of individuals who often feel as though their emotions or impulses are difficult to manage. And so, in many cases, engaging in those types of power dynamics can help an ADHD gain a deeper understanding of themselves, of their needs, which then allows greater emotional self-awareness. And I can't stress it enough, the intentionality behind these experiences. It also helps to mitigate impulsivity, offering a deeper level of reflection and mindfulness that might otherwise be possible. So ultimately, BDSM offers ADHDers a pretty good framework to explore not only their desires, their boundaries, but also to engage with and regulate their emotions in ways that can enhance their overall emotional and sensory well-being. It's a tool. It's a tool for cultivating awareness, managing intense sensations, creating a sense of structure, creating safety within an environment that might otherwise feel chaotic or overwhelming, underwhelming. And so for many neurodivergent folk, this type of regulation can be incredibly empowering, like I've said before. And it can help with navigating our emotions, our impulses, with more clarity, with more confidence. It really can be a space of setting ourselves up for success. And again, at the end of the day, ADHD and BDSM have a lot in common, right? They both involve structure, sensory experiences, deep need for engagement. And whether you're deep into the scene or just maybe BDSM curious, the most important thing is understanding your own needs, what works for you, your brain, right? And if you're not into it, that's okay. If you have ADHD and you've been listening to this and you're like, do I like it? I don't know. Should I like it because I have ADHD? Don't do that. Don't gaslight your diagnosis. Don't gaslight your experiences. This episode is really more for the validation piece that a lot of people don't get. And we currently don't have in the empirical data. And again, this is where I stress I'm really hoping my research can really start the pathway of giving scientific validation to things that I'm seeing every single day in my clinical observations. And so if you take anything away from today's episode, let it be this: you are not too much, right? If you like BDSM, that's great. It makes sense. If you don't like it, that's fine. Not for you, not your cup of tea. Leave it at the door. But I always implore people to lean into, explore safely. And remember, you get to determine what is working for you or not for you. And it's all about setting your environment, your relationship, and your playtime up for success. And if you feel like this episode has resonated with you, or maybe you know somebody, or you're in a relationship with somebody, dating somebody, married to somebody, that you want them to understand more about BDSM, please, by all means, share, subscribe, like, follow. This is for you. This is that free, accessible information that you deserve. And until next time, be safe.